In this episode of Common SENSimilla, we'll be talking to an inventor. Today's guest has been part of teams building cutting-edge tech like the Oculus VR headsets, certain biomedical tools, and various applications for defense, automotive, and aerospace industries. Thankfully, our guest decided to use his talents for good and has made the highest tech joint rolling machine on the market. Nice work. Today's guest is finally going to reveal Zuck's master plan for world domination. Kyle Loucks, founder of RollPros. Welcome to Common SENSimilla.
Thanks for having me, Will. Can't wait to tell you all about his master plan.
We're finally going to dive in. I want to know about why he drinks water the way he does, what sort of Neuralink technology we can expect in the over the next few years. But before we get to that, I'm curious about your upbringing. I know I grew up with a few kids like you. So I'm curious about your parents and how frustrated you make them. Were you able to have a TV in your house? Were you that kid who took everything apart?
Oh man, that's funny. And that's kind of relieving to hear that there's others out there like me, because I could not keep a toy in my room that had any kind of electronics for longer than like a span of 2 weeks. You know, it's like I had to figure out what's going on inside of this thing. And I just, that's funny that you say that, because I obsessed over taking shit apart and figuring out what's going on.
Is there any toy? How old are you?
36.
Okay, so I'm a couple years older than you, so maybe a little bit past the G.I. Joe generation, maybe more Ninja Turtles, but those weren't too mechanical. What was the first thing you remember being like, I got to figure out what's going on here?
I remember I was really young. I was maybe it was before I had even used a screwdriver on anything. But I remember this talking bird that would repeat back to you what it said, and it flapped its wings, and it had some movement to it. And I had to have been maybe 6 or 7, years old when I was like, I gotta figure this thing out. And I distinctly remember just coming at it with a hammer and a pry bar and whatever I could find. And then, And then my parents learned okay, we got to get him things that he can build with rather than destroy.
So more STEM toys, more construction sets, maybe video game programming, that sort of thing.
Totally. Yeah. It was erector sets, Legos, and breadboards.
Aside from the talking bird, do you think that anything in pop culture played any influence in kind of your interest? And what I'm thinking about is now again, you're a little bit younger than I am, so I think this would have been maybe your generation, but Bill Nye growing up, for me, it was Doc Brown, right? And I'm not an inventor, but the things that got me interested in science were Back to the Future, right? When Doc Brown, falls off or slips off the toilet and hits his head on the sink and invents the flux capacitor. That to me was maybe that was more impactful for me in terms of understanding divine inspiration, or just what a muse is or something like that. But I'm curious if there's anything did you give a shit about Bill Nye growing up? Was any of that interesting?
Oh yeah, I love Bill Nye. I love those episodes, and we got to see that at school. And I remember the Transformers, that series was intriguing to me, that something could transform. And really, I lived in kind of a rural area, so I didn't really have TV, so a lot of my inspiration was just being in the woods, the backyard, and being we gotta cross this creek, or we gotta make a fishing pole out of something, or make a little bow and arrow. And it was you've got 4 things, and you got sticks and twigs, and you got a knife, and it's what could you build out of these components? So I think it was
there's a whole show. There's a whole show where that's the exact theme, right? I think that's Naked and Afraid, right? They drop you in the woods, or
totally.
You can have 3 things. What do you want? Um, that's
Totally.
cool. So more of like a survivalist, like I don't have a fishing pole. I want to fish, so I might as well figure out how to do it.
Right. Yeah. I'd say that's, and then, once I got old enough to be into like cars, like that was a big thing. It was like, oh my gosh, there's so many things to like learn about in this car. And so I went pretty deep into that in high school for sure.
That's generally one of those early things that lead you down the path. It's either the car or being an Uber compute, just like an
Oh,
Uber
right.
nerd on the computer as well, and like trying to figure, whatever avenue your nerddom takes. Like it's either automotive or program. Sometimes both. Sometimes they obviously intersect, especially now. Like it's all the same. What was the first car you took apart?
Oh, it was a Mazda RX-7, 1987 RX-7 Turbo 2. Yeah, loved that thing. And yeah, only God knows how it went back together and started again. There's some, yeah.
Now, did you build cars? Like, were you that sort of guy who were like you were like finding parts and trying to build your own? Like, were you
Yeah,
in
yeah.
that part of shop class? You were that high school dude?
Yeah, always like trying to figure out something I could do to a car to make it faster or like make a little screen pop out or I mean, I had a BMW where the rear windows, they did the little like fold out thing, but I could never reach back and open them. And so I created this little like, gear motor with a little arm and, um, you know, kind of made my own actuator for it. And that was kind of like, it was fun on the forums to, see people's reactions there and had a lot of like, inquisitive orders on it. So yeah,
you
I'm always
sold those.
I sold a couple but it was like, my market was like this big, right? And
Yeah.
so it was not really worth the time to build them. But yeah, that was kind of like my first little product.
Did you now was that like born out of your own so I guess what I ask you is like in addition to being fascinated with how things worked, do you think you had aside from this thing, do you think you had any entrepreneurial to you? Like was this were you just like were people like I need to buy this thing from you or like all right, or was it a company you started?
It was kind of it was like a test, and I've always been entrepreneurial. Like I had a screen printer when I was, 15 and I started a little t-shirt company kind of in high school and through college. And that was not really like fulfilling a need. That was just like I wanted to try to do something that I could like sell a product. Um, and then there was like, yeah, and then once I got into like engineering and like product development, that's when like these little contraptions kind of started floating to the top of my purview. And yeah, like I wanted to see what I could do, what I could do in the market.
Is it easier to improve something that exists or create something new?
Hmm. It's always easier to improve. Like it is. But that's not the fun part, like I like to like dive deeper into the problem statement. Um, and I guess it's kind of a gray area in between those two things too, right? Like, I mean, we'll get into the pre-rolls, but some might say that I just improved the pre-rolls, but I really feel like I innovated it because of how I took it. Um, so yeah, there's not like a clear line there.
Interesting. So you were entrepreneurial growing up. You had a screen printing business. You made these little gadgets for your BMW that people bought off you. Um, was there cannabis happening in your life at this time?
Yeah, is that
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah,
I'm
it was
picturing you in the shop class in high school, smoking Marlboro Reds, covered in grease, like rolling joints under,
yeah, it was. I mean, it was definitely like later into high school, and I'm, thankful that I didn't get too into it earlier than that. But it was eye opening to me to be able to take in this, this smoke and be able to change my perspective on anything in life. It was like I used it for a lot of different creative problems that I was thinking through, at the time, whether it be, some new shirt design or some really small transmission problem in this printer. I'm just like rack on it all day, and then I can smoke a little bit of weed, and all of a sudden, like, I look at it differently, and it bursts up in the ideas. It's just like boom, like right there. And I love that. I loved the utility of the plant.
I love the way that you described it as if it were like, and honestly, dude, I've been doing this for a while and I talk to a lot of people. No one, and it is a muse, but no one ever describes it that way. Like, it's often just a consequence of being a social human being at some point in your life. Like you encounter cannabis, right? Very rarely, and you're talking, and this is like, there's a scene in Animal House, right, where they smoke weed with the professor, and they turn the lights down, and they're like talking about, I don't remember, they're like talking about something fucking academic, and they turn the lights down and they close the curtains, and they smoke, and they're very purposeful though, like in that sort of way, like there's intent, like I want to figure this out. I know this thing hasn't, like for me it's taking a shower, honestly, like it's weed too, but like I'll get in the shower and I'll just be like, oh, and I'll be thinking about like a video idea or whatever, and like boom, so it's really nice to hear you say that, kind of describe it as a muse for you.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like when I got into like real like creative like idea generation, that was like my first job was in the medical device industry, and it was a great job. I was surrounded by, people from MIT, Stanford, and I was just an intern. I was like 22 at the time, and but we'd all sit around and we'd like, everybody's trying to like pick apart this, it's like an indication or like a problem that somebody's having, and the surgeon's like, this is like a hard fix. And we're all sitting around this table trying to pick at it and trying to pull things out of left field. And it was pretty funny, like how I had been doing that my whole life, but this was like a structured version of it. And yeah, you just sprinkle a little bit of cannabis in there, and all of a sudden your ideas, you get way more bad ideas too. But
Sure.
like they sometimes you get two bad ideas that like form to make like an even way better idea,
Yeah.
So it's yeah, I love the utility of the plant.
That's awesome. That's totally cool. So let me ask you this then. So why does, and this is obviously hyperbolic generalizations, but why do stoners make the best inventors, right? Like, and again, I'm not an inventor, but I am utilitarian, right? So like I can remember making bongs out of, dude, super soakers,
Oh
lacrosse
yeah.
sticks, like, like whatever, you know what I mean? Like, how are we so good? The apple, like who the fuck figured out the apple? You know what I mean? Like who is that guy or girl, whatever? Who is that person? Like I want to meet them. But is that because of the muse aspect, do you think?
I mean, I definitely think that most potheads or most stoners are, we're on the fringe, and we're willing to let go, like I think that if you have too much like anxiety or too much like stress, try like if I'm put under a timeline, I'm kind of like I'm a worse engineer, like
Yeah.
somebody's harping on me like we got to get this out, I'm like and so if you
Same.
can if you can get rid of that perspective of time or anxiety, and I think that most cannabis users, they use cannabis for that. It like helps them release themselves from the day-to-day stresses.
Yeah.
And I think if you're good at that, then you can, yeah, the creativity just like it flourishes.
Yeah, you don't stop thinking about the problem. You're giving yourself an opportunity to kind of break the box that you're thinking about that problem in.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. I think as people set to timelines, like we put ourselves in boxes, right? Like, and we're like, okay, I got to finish this, and then I can do this, and cannabis kind of like, makes that box evaporate, and you're in your own space and your own time, and you don't have, it's
The ingenious ways that people have thought, like I'm just on my desk right now,
yeah.
right, is one of these things, right?
Oh yeah.
Right. And it's, Bluetooth, and it connects to an app on my phone, and it, has a perfect, it's like,
yeah, I know. Yeah.
We haven't cured cancer yet, but we'll get you high as fuck.
Hey, we're getting there too.
We're getting there too. We're getting there too.
That's next.
Are there inventors like that have inspired? Like, I don't know any, so are there engineers or, I mean, Elon Musk, I guess he's not an inventor, but, that sort of person, Johnny Ive or Steve Wozniak, whatever, like who, like,
yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think Elon
like what baseball cards did what inventor baseball cards were you trying? Whose rookie card did you get?
Right. Hey, that's a great question.
I don't even know if people, if engineers, inventors think about their peers that way. Like, I'm sure there are inspirational people who work in the field, but is anybody like, dude, did you see what fucking, Kyle's doing? Like, dude's on a different plane.
I mean, there's definitely individuals, right? Like Oren Bernstein, he was from MIT. He's working on like nuclear reactors right now. And I mean, he was a huge inspiration of mine. I don't think the dude ever touched a cannabis. But
not a single one.
Yeah, it's like, and I think he was very, I think one of the most important things of an inventor is like that they have like kind of a childlike wonder still, and they don't, they don't ever grow up, and he definitely fit that bill. He was, and he was great at using that to his advantage. But yeah, as far as like people, in pop culture, it'd probably be, I think Elon, he tackles hard problems, and I think that's something that I definitely am always looking for, is like, where's the next like really hard problem to solve? Because those are the fun ones, like working through a big, nasty, hard problem is fun. And he's not afraid to take them on. He took on NASA, took on the auto industry. Like, dang, dude, he's got vision and he's executing on it. So I'm all for that.
Well, I do want to talk about him a bit more because he was on a podcast this week, a very famous one, slightly controversial. You can find it. It's on the internet, but he talks extensively about manufacturing. So that is, and the difficulty of it, like the idea, according to him, is he said simple, is the simple part. It's the execution and manufacturing. So I want to get into that as a challenge, but let's get there first. When you went into college and were trying to figure out what post-collegiate life would look like, you obviously engrossed yourself in engineering classes for most of your time there. What did you focus any of your professional time on? Like, how did you figure out what your interests were going to be?
I just kind of followed my nose, it was like, and so I graduated 2009, and I knew right then was kind of when medical devices, there was a bit of like there there's a spur there of like innovation in the medical world. Um, and I was working at a steel mill at the time, and that was fun, but it was kind of like it didn't have the white space, like I like a good white space that's like, undefined.
Expand
Whereas
on that. What do you mean?
um like the creative space, or like the constraints are very low. So, in the steel industry, it's like, okay, it's got to cost this much. It's got to be done like this. It's got to be, it's got to be like this. In medical, and a lot of it is money, like you can get a lot of money for your medical device. So you're able to use titanium. You're able to put more time and effort into like, the like how it's manufactured. And so those are all constraints that in some industries are really tight, but medical is pretty big. And you could work with surgeons, you could work in soft tissue, you could do orthopedic, bone fixation. And so I was trying to find like, yeah, a good white space to kind of start exploring. And that, yeah, ended up, I was an intern at Acute Innovations, just down the road. And I got some incredible experience there, really cut my teeth in concept generation, and like, that was the first time I ever had access to like a 3D printer. And I was printing things like every night. It was like, I remember I was like blowing away all these like older engineers. There's like, who's this like new guy? And I'm like, can you believe we can print these and then play with them the next day?
It's so cool.
Yeah, and yeah, I really cut my teeth there, because yeah, there was a lot of room for improvement, and there was money behind it to fund that.
How does a company like that decide what to prioritize? I mean, my assumption, knowing absolutely nothing about the medical device industry, is that there's need for an infinite type of devices, right? Like, every medical department, as it were, needs something to figure out what's wrong with you, right? So like, how does a company like that figure out where to put their attention and their resources?
So this was an interesting one, because we specialized in the chest cavity.
Oh, cool.
So we had like a rib plate, we had a sternum plate, and it was kind of this like in between world where, the orthopedic surgeons, the guys going after your arms,
Yep.
they didn't want to touch the ribs. And then the guys that are, going into doing heart surgery, or like the people, going into your thoracic cavity, they're like, oh, I don't want to deal with these ribs. And so it was my Joel Gillard, he was my boss. He's the one that identified this like kind of market that was really small, really niche. And he was able to, yeah, create, from a couple of these. So like the big one is like, you get in a car accident and you break like 4 or 5 of your ribs. It's really bad. And nobody wants to get in there to fix them. And most people are like, your ribs will regrow. But like a lot of the times these people end up on a ventilator for like months, they get pneumonia, and it's a really sad thing to see. I guess that's the thing about the medical space. There's so many problems. You see these like people that are in so much pain, and you're like, there's got to be something we can do. And so this device, which is a rib plate, that's you could plate the rib relatively easily. Was gaining some traction, because they're like, yeah, these people, they need to get better, but orthopods won't touch them, and the cardio guys won't touch them. And so we had to make a system that was easy enough for either of them to fix these ribs. Sorry, did I answer your
No,
question?
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, this is, you did. And it's by, I didn't think I didn't think the answer was going to be as innocent as that. Like, I thought it was going to be, a bit more about, what's the most profitable, medical issue facing the country this day. I'm more of a cynic, but like, to hear that it was actually far more innocent than that is refreshing. you know
Yeah, and
um
it was a really small company too, which, that allowed us to run lean and small, and that was like my first like real love in business was the small business. Like, there was 7 of us, and we were able to change thousands of people's lives, and we did it having a good time. Everybody knew everybody on a very close level. So, you know, there was never conflicts because we were all like such a team.
mhm.
And that was, yeah, that was my first love of business in like a true like economic sense, not just like me, selling stuff online and, making t-shirts. It was this like, you could have an impact, like a direct impact on people's lives. Um, and it was a great feeling too. Yeah, it was a great feeling.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So talk to me a bit about, you just said that, acute engineering,
Innovations. Yep.
acute
Close enough.
innovations was a small team. You eventually started working for some bigger teams, including one of the teams that was working on the then Oculus Rift, now Oculus VR headset. Can you talk a bit about working on that project? But also, I'd really like your insight on small. I mean, you just told us about small teams, but talk to me about the bigger team and like now dealing with maybe one of the biggest companies on the planet.
Yeah, yeah. And so, yeah, how I got to working for Meta was I was working at a design firm called Sigma Design, and they did everything. That was really fun for me too because it's a bit more electromechanical design work. Um, and and yeah, they got this bid from Meta, which at the time, yeah, it was Oculus. And what they did, what Facebook did is they had more money than God, so they sent out the same design problem to probably like 20 or 30 teams. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's a
Yeah.
baller move.
Oh, right, right. And so
Who,
they had
here, we'll
this
pay
like,
you all. Who fixes it? Who fixes this problem the best?
yeah,
That's unbelievable.
it was insane. And yeah, and I can tell you more about their facility too. It was like incredible, 5-star chef, like all expenses paid. But so yeah, they gave this design problem where they basically had this optical path, laid out on like a test bed that they're like, we need this to go on someone's head, and they gave that to, yeah, like 20 or 30 different firms. Um, and so in a sense, I was again working as a small company. I had probably like 4 or 5 people on my team, and I was kind of leading the design work, and we were executing, um, and eventually our prototype won. It was like one of the top ones, and Mark wore it on his head in some huge company address, some big conference. And it was a huge celebration point. It was like awesome, like, all right, what's next? Let's go. And they're like, well, please hold. And it was like, wait, why? Like, we gotta let's do the next design. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And that's when I started realizing like what happens in a big business, and it
Yep.
was like, you have all this momentum and we really created this cool thing, but then we hit this wall of kind of like management and like indecision. And I could not, like, it was really hard for me to to work through that, because I wanted to keep going. I'm like, let's go, let's go, let's go. Um, and that was kind of my first real dealings with big business.
Yeah, as opposed to working for Acute Innovations, right, where you could jam out in the garage and figure out problems and have fun and like get some momentum.
Yeah.
There's nothing like a, gargantuan company full of people with opinions, full of management with opinions, and basically bureaucracy.
Right.
That just slows things down. And a lot of times that's actually intentional. Like if you're Apple or something like that, like those moves are intentional, like removing the headphone jack, that takes years and years and years of planning, to do. Whereas you think we'll just remove the headphone jack, it's never that easy. So working on Oculus versus working on medical devices, one has probably as much influence, maybe more, from the marketing department as it does from the engineers working on it, and the other far less. It's just engineers, maybe very little marketing influence. Can you talk about some of those outside influences on jobs like that?
Yeah, I think the outside influence of marketing.
Well, I like think about, Steve and Johnny, right?
Yeah.
Like Steve Jobs and Johnny Ives would drive their engineers like completely insane because, Steve Jobs would walk into the engineering department and say, hey, I want this thing, I want the headphone jack on the other side, and I need this to be whatever. He would say something impossible. The engineers, and this is like, a trope of these types of businesses wherein, the management says, do this thing. It happens in digital too. The engineer or programmer says that's impossible. It can't be done. The manager says, no, you sure? And then it eventually gets done, right? So like that's what I mean is like, if it weren't for a marketing department, the Oculus would be a full suit, right? But the marketing department's like, nah, dude, you gotta wear it on your face. It's got to be tiny and look cool and look dope, and we got to be able to sell this thing. So like, talk a bit about that. Like, you probably didn't have that at all at Acute Innovations.
Yeah, it was very little at Acute. Yeah, it was the Acute Innovations was easy. It was an easy sell because it's a technical sell to a technical buyer, the surgeon. But yeah, the Oculus was tougher, right? It was like, you can't have any buttons. It's got to weigh this much. It can't be. The ergonomics of it, right? Like try to fit something on.
Comfortable.
Oh yeah, it's got to be comfortable, and it's only got to have like one adjustment point, and you got to have speakers that line up with everybody's ears. And so it's like there was a tremendous amount of effort that went into making it look and touch and feel right. And that was a huge undertaking for sure. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why, I don't put a cell phone cover on my phone, because it's like, I know how hard the engineers worked to fit it into this box and make it look this good, Yeah. And so I have a tremendous amount of respect for working with, those are industrial designers. That's what that's they're the ones that make it look pretty. And they're not the easiest to work with. They've got big, grandiose ideas.
Yeah, it's a creative vision. They have to, they're thinking about how do we make this sexy? How do we sell units? And especially when you got a big thing on your face, it's like 4 pairs of ski goggles. Like,
right.
That's a tough sell, right? I'm curious, just before we move on to RollPros, I'm curious your thoughts on. Because Meta just put out the Ray-Bans, right? There's a Ray-Ban version. So I'm curious what your thoughts on that. And also on Apple's, I forget what it's called, iVision or Vision Pro or something like that.
Right.
What do you think of Apple's kind of?
I haven't tried Apple's yet, but from what I understand, they have a pass through, don't they? So can they also see the real world? Because I think that
so yeah, it's all it's done through cameras, but yes.
yeah. So that's AR, so augmented reality, and that is what I was working on. I wasn't actually doing the virtual reality where everything's dark. I was in the AR, and that is a way harder problem to solve.
AR.
AR, yeah, because your brain is so good at picking up a fake. Like we are. So that's when you start feeling nauseous. And so if you're trying to overlay something into the real world, it's got to be perfect. And if one little thing is off, you get woozy. So and I haven't tried one yet, but
Me
if
neither,
they're
no.
able to
I definitely
successfully,
pre-ordered the pair.
oh, you did?
For sure. I mean, because I worked for Apple for many years and I drank that Kool-Aid. So I definitely want to try all the new things. And the thing I love about it, or I think I will love about it, is that it's the future of the desktop. Like, to me, in terms of just like the computing power behind it or the practical usage of it, like it's just, I can put a keyboard anywhere and do stuff like those sorts of applications are interest me. It's just, it's the next iteration of what my, MacBook Pro will eventually become.
Totally.
And then same with the sunglasses from Ray-Ban and Meta. Like those are, there's obviously significant limitations in what those do. They're mostly like recording devices, but your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean that's, once somebody gets there where it's just a super simple, sleek pair of glasses, that will be a game changer. Yeah, I think there's a ways to go on that for sure. And I'm excited for it in like a design and like a CAD perspective. Because a lot of times I'm working on the screen, I'm like, that kind of looks right. But I usually got to like either 3D print it or, make some kind of mock-up laser cut it to actually like feel it and like see it in real life, be like, yeah, that'll do. So we can get a little bit closer to that and potentially iterate faster if we're like, if we're inside that, CAD. So that's what I'm excited for.
Cool. Just like actually being able to use VR, AR to like experience something that you're trying to make.
Totally. Yeah. I think that's going to
awesome.
be huge. Yeah.
Okay. So your LinkedIn profile is mostly, employment history, right? Were you still making t-shirts? Was the screen printer still going during that time? How were you flexing entrepreneurially, or were you not during those years post college?
I was always entrepreneurial. It was usually on contract for someone else. So, like I working at Acute, I felt like that was my company, like that. And, two of the three products that we launched there were, directly influenced by my design and my work. So I kind of claim my companies, and that it's small enough that you can claim it. You're like,
put your flag in there. Tiles.
Yeah. Actually, it's funny. I just heard the product that I made at Acute. It did like $70 million in revenue last year.
Bro, you need a royalty, son. What are you doing?
Right? I was getting paid like $15 an hour. I was like an intern.
Jeez. I think you gotta go Oliver Twist that dude and be like, "May I have some more, sir?"
Yeah. But and then when I was working at Sigma, I got a little wall of fame here. But
yeah,
so like this cool. Is something I did at Sigma.
What the hell is that thing? A comb for horsetails?
So it's a fork dispenser or a knife dispenser that I worked on for Georgia Pacific. But the cool thing is it releases the next.
Those are knives.
Yeah, knives. Yeah.
I see. That's so cool.
But it was like, this is like kind of a little company in and of itself, like
Yeah,
they were
yeah,
like, look, we don't, people don't want to press a button because that means everybody pressed the button. And, this was aimed at germaphobes, right? So,
yeah.
and like, or if you have like a jar full of these things, somebody could have coughed on it. So
Yep.
this was like a dispenser where it's like you only touch the cutlery that you're going to use. And it was, that was super fun. And it was
Oh
like,
yeah.
my company gave this to me. They found the job and like I was the only one working on it. And so it's like, there you go. Like I was basically doing a startup every 3 to 4 months. And
Got it.
so,
So you were
yeah,
given some sort of entrepreneurial autonomy within the companies that you were working to solve some of these problems that were getting passed across your desk. So
exactly.
at what point do you feel the itch to set out and maybe start solving your own problems?
It seems like once I got established, I got the itch. And so, for a little bit, I was working on site at HP. So they started me on a contract, but then they're like, hey, this guy's good. He's doing good things. And once it got to be more regular, or they are trying to like mold me into a
You're
manager,
like, I'm out.
I know, yeah, yeah. And like I was a disruptor, and so like if I wasn't doing that, I was kind of like a border collie, and I'd be getting into the trash, or I'd be like starting, working on things that weren't my directives. So it was hard for me in some of these jobs to stay longer than so long because they kept wanting to nurture me into something different. And I was like, I just want to like just let me keep creating and you know
It's
start it.
definitely an entrepreneurial characteristic of not being, putting yourself, building your own box, so to speak, as opposed to like having someone put you in one, right?
Yep. Yeah, that's
And it's
right.
never a box. It's more of like some, I don't even know,
Yeah,
some weird geometry, some fractal-ish bullshit. So did you think like, so you're at HP and, they want you to be a manager and you're like, I'm out. Did you think, were you thinking about solving problems in the cannabis industry, or were you figuring I'll start my own acute innovations and I'll look for problems to solve, and whatever comes across our desk? Or was it like RollPro?
yeah, it's funny. So it was like my last one was Meta. So that was the one where, they kind of like found out I was good. So they're like, we're going to keep this guy, but we're not going to let him do everything. And so I was working for them, and yeah, I saw this, this emerging market. This was around like 2016, 2017. And it's like, holy cow, like I can't believe this is being legalized.
Yeah.
And I knew that there's only so many truly emerging markets in the world left. Like everything
Yeah.
else has been thought of. And so, yeah, when I saw cannabis opening up, I was like, yeah, my focus was on that. I was like, all right, there's got to be something I can do. And it was actually like just by random luck, that I bought my first pre-roll, and it was a shitty experience.
That was it.
That was it. And it was like, and I knew how to roll a joint. I've been rolling joints for the past, 18 years. And I was like, this is not. And then I found out how they made the cones and how they filled it from the top. And I'm like, all right, game over. This is not how you create like a good burning joint.
Mm-hmm.
And so I
So
started.
real quick for
Yeah,
the listeners, the difference, right? You have your hand rolled joint, which, you roll up and it's more akin to a cigarette shape, as opposed to your pre roll that you get at a dispensary, which is which are generated in mass using what's called a tumbler generally,
Mhm.
which is a big piece of Tupperware with holes in it that fit a pre-roll cone. You then pour all your weed in it and you tumble it like this, right? And it packs these joints. And sometimes there are automated versions
Mhm.
of this, but generally it's like a big thing that a person shakes all the weed into, and then that you pull out the pre-roll and you twist, maybe you shake a little bit and you twist at the top. But here's my problem with the pre-roll, right?
Yeah.
Is for every 10 you buy, one's perfect and the other 9 maybe I'm sure I have one somewhere, but
I
like
know, that's what I'm looking for.
yeah, that bit between at the bottom between the filter never gets full, so it bends, or it's too packed at the top, so it like doesn't burn properly, right? So the benefit of a hand rolled whatever cigarette, joint, blunt, whatever, is that there's a more even burn, and there's a more consistent sort of thing, right? Experience.
Exactly. Look, you did it.
I did it
That's
for you.
it. And that was
All right,
like
everybody. That's been the show. We'll see you later.
yeah, and it takes somebody that's rolled a joint before, that knows that good cannabis, fresh cannabis, is sticky and clumpy, and it's hard to roll. It's hard to get into this nice even log. And you also know that if you're using fresh sticky material, there's no way in heck you're going to be able to fill a cone evenly, like consistently. It's like I think one of the first ways I ever smoked weed was I poured out a cigarette and I kind of filled it with weed,
Right.
and it doesn't work because you got
Doesn't
like
work.
a granular here and you got a big old void and then another granule here and you got these voids,
Yeah.
and I saw that.
Avoid the noid. Annoyed the void.
And that was like when it clicked. I was like, wow, like this is a physics problem, and I don't care if you have a machine around it, you're gonna have problems filling a cone with fresh sticky flower.
The
And
one thing it does solve for, though, is scalability, right? So like you
right,
can't hire someone to sit on a table and hand roll. First of
right,
all, it's not hygienic. You have to
no,
lick those papers. Like, who's going to do that? There is none of that happen with the pre-rolls, but I can roll 100 at a time if I have a tumbler, or 1,000 every 20 minutes if I have a larger machine. And that's attractive to manufacturers, right? Like
oh
I
yeah.
don't want to roll 5 joints an hour. I want to roll 5,000 joints an hour.
Yep. And I totally get it. Like if you're like a startup cannabis shop and you can get into one of these tumblers for, a couple $1,000, and you buy some cones online, like that's like your easiest entry into the market. It's just, but that has a scalability limitation too, right? Like now, because you have to hand touch every single one. You got to
Yep.
weigh it, make sure it's the right weight. Then you got to hand twist it, and that doesn't scale very well. And the other problem is, back to the filling mechanism is
Yep.
you got to dry out your flour. Like that's what people are doing to fill these cones more consistently. Is one of these farms I went to, you grind up your material and lay it out on a cookie sheet, and then you leave it on the cookie sheet out in just an open air room at 12% humidity, and it just all your terpenes evaporate, and you get this dry like dust afterwards, which flows really well into a cone. Like you can, once you turn your material into, essentially sand, you can fill anything, but you just lost all those great flavonoids, terpenes, and it's going to burn hot and harsh. And I think only like a real stoner gets that, like they know you got to have fresh weed, otherwise it's going to burn hot.
So talk to me about RollPro, and I want to get into like the how you knew how to do all this stuff too. I think that's really important. But I wanted to since we're talking about tumblers, like give me the brief elevator pitch. I am a manufacturer who rolls joints. I own a tumbler. Why am I buying a RollPro?
Yeah, I mean, the CFO case is easy, right? It's like, you can roll 1,000 joints an hour with one operator. So, just do the ROI on that, versus having 10 people sitting around a table twisting joints. That's something that any automation company can solve. What we did differently is we're actually rolling the joint. So we are mechanically radially compressing this joint, and we tumble it. So we're rolling it as we're pulling it tighter, and that allows the operator, the producer, to determine how tightly packed it is. So because each flower is a little bit different, you want them all to pull the same. And so you can dial in just how tight you want it so that you get the same draw on every single joint. And it's, because we're mechanically rolling it, you can run, your fresh flower, you can do a bigger grind size, and you can infuse too. It handles refused material just fine.
That's amazing. So talk to me about the ideation. So you told me about the problem that you were trying to solve, which was you had a bad pre-roll experience, and you correctly assumed that most people were having similar problems. Beyond like the efficiency, which hypothetically no one knows about the efficiency, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like this is a new device. It didn't exist before you invented it. There probably wasn't a huge outcry for differently shaped joints. So what was that value add that you thought was going to really set the RollPro apart from kind of that competition?
It's the quality of the smoking experience. So because you can run higher moisture contents, like up above 12% moisture, you get a better quality joint out of the machine. And this is interesting. I'll go back to when we were talking about the gray area between improvement and an innovation. I see the cone filling machines as just an improvement. It's like, okay, well, this is a cone and this is how we fill it now with the tumbler. And so they improved that. You don't have a person there, filling it with cones.
Yeah.
But what I did was it could be seen as an improvement, but it's actually a real innovation in that, we're creating the joint differently. And we're, putting these controls in the operator and the producer's hands, like that, that density, and we're opening up what you can put into the machine, like fresh, sticky, infused flower. And so, we're giving these freedoms back to our customers, and that's where it's more of an innovation because it's completely different.
How is it catching on? Are people are you selling these devices?
Yeah, it's catching on great. And it's kind of there is a paradigm shift that has to occur because, people aren't used to a straight rolled joint.
Yep.
And so it's taken a little bit of getting used to. But the customers that have adopted it and are running their, high quality flower through it, they're getting repeat customers and really building that brand loyalty, because one of the benefits of the differentiating form factor is somebody smokes it and they're like, oh, or they get it out of the package and like, whoa, that's different. And then when they smoke it and they're like, whoa, that tastes great. It's cool. It doesn't hurt my throat. Like, that was phenomenal. They come back to that brand, they're not. And then, you do that side by side with a cone and it's like night and day, better.
Are any of your clients like abandoning cones altogether? Because my assumption is that it like this just primarily opens up, if I'm selling these things, right? I'm probably taking beyond the differentiating attributes that make this device cool. I'm saying this is a whole other product line that you can add to your current pre-roll line. Are people abandoning cones?
Yeah, well, it's a lot of the times they start with, yeah, we just want something new and different. We want to do an infused line. So, or we have this really high quality flower coming out. We want to do it with glass tips, and, we can do that through your machine. And so they start with that, but then they start seeing the operational efficiencies, and they're like, we're going to move them all to this, and we're going to get a couple more machines. And yeah, I think that you either start with it or you eventually convert to it.
So take me to ideation and go to market. So, just looking at your website, it's in a nice box, like everything is contained in I don't know how big it is, but it's contained in a nice box. I imagine the insides are super complex. So talk to me about kind of ideation, testing, GTM.
Yeah. So ideation.
I see that you have all of your hair. So like it couldn't have been that bad.
Well, the nice thing was I didn't have any investors, I didn't have anybody breathing down my neck. I have a very understanding wife, and
Congrats.
yeah, that's key. I gotta call her out. Christy, you're great. Love you.
Christy, you're great. We love you here too. Keep doing you.
And she wasn't into weed. Like, she was like, I was still smoking in the shed, being like, and sure. I told her I'm developing this machine. So yeah, she's a saint.
We love you, Christy.
But yeah, it was, so I remember, those little like top rolling machines. Yeah, it just has a belt. I remember goofing around with one of those in college, and I remember like I could make a pretty good joint with it if I only could like control how tightly I was rolling.
Yeah. And
so that's kind of where I started, was with that mechanism. And then it just got out of hand, It's like I started, conceptualizing, all right, well, how do I automate that, that tension? How do I put a motor on that? And then it's like, okay, well, how do you feed paper? And then how do you wet the gum line on the paper? How do you feed the crutches? Like, how do you singulate a crutch?
And these so are all, like, and you're implementing like existing products, meaning that you're like feeding raw papers and whatever products into those things. You didn't need to create a whole new paper, for your machine.
Yeah, the paper was nice because I was able to use like a bobbin of paper, which is a roll, like just a continuous, receipt roll, right? Of like 3,000 meters of paper. And so that was actually really nice. And that's a differentiation from the cone machines too, because they're dealing with these inputs, which are variable, right? Like a cone. And just so you know, cones are handmade overseas in China. Like they're not perfect. And so, yeah, I have this very consistent input of paper. And then the crutches, where I kind of lucked out and found like these roll your own crutches that are big in the Czech Republic, because they still hand roll a lot of their cigarettes. And so, yeah, it's like I had these inputs, and I just had to build the machine and solve the little problems, like all the way up the chain of, like, yeah, first, how do you feed paper reliably, and then how do you cut that paper reliably? And then, and then I had like a little, I had access to a machine shop. So I machined my first couple of prototypes, and I was able to kind
Super
of
cool.
run it in the garage by like, switching this valve on, moves the platen to here and then switch this valve on and,
Mm-hmm.
like kind of like ran it, manually.
Yeah.
And
Just
then,
prototyping.
yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, I did that, that was my bread and butter. That's what I love to do. Any of the listeners too, if you guys got any like really hard problems, like I'll give you a free hour brainstorm and like we can put this up on the whiteboard. And I love that stuff,
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I was just going to work, doing what I love to do. And
How were you? So you were still working for Meta or whatever. You were still being a 9 to 5 dude, and then at night going in the basement and tinkering.
yep. Yeah,
How
it
long?
was.
How long before you like had something when you were like Eureka?
Well, yeah, it was probably, it was probably like 2 or 3 months before I had like one joint pop out. That was like a eureka moment. And
Yep.
it was kind of like, that was like, all right, I gotta spend more time on this. And then it was probably like 18 months before I had something that was, like chunking along and
Yeah.
like
You just push
actually,
one button.
yeah,
You didn't have to
yeah,
pull the chain, and the mouse would run on the wheel. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And then I had that thing for probably 6 months to a year, just kind of running hemp for guys down in Oregon and, fine tuning all the little timings and the little mechanisms.
So for around 2 years, you were tinkering, ideating, improving, getting this joint roll, A/B testing with maybe real world clients or people.
Mm-hmm.
People would send you product to turn into product, right?
Yep.
When is the time when you think this is something I need to focus more? I need to turn this into a company.
Yeah, that was probably mid 2020, when I had rolled, tens of thousands of joints through this test bed, and I was like, I gotta start marketing this as a machine. And I sold my first two machines sight unseen, with just a joint, like a CBD joint. Give huge credits to Lisa Kaiser. She's one of my top salespeople today, and she sold two machines sight unseen off of a joint, and that was
Nice
kind
job,
of like,
Lisa.
yeah, and that was my seed money. That was like, then that was when I was like, all right, I got to quit my job and I got to start designing this thing like full time, because it was still, like a welded together frame with like, some janky C clamps on it.
Well, that's
And
where the product designer in you has to come out and turn it into something. How big is it? The size of a microwave, or roughly like a little
it's
bit
about
bigger?
4 feet wide and, just over 4 feet tall and, a couple feet deep.
And
Yeah.
around how many joints can it spit out in an hour or so, whatever?
Yeah, it can do, we sell it at 750 per hour, but it can actually clock at closer to like 1,000 per hour. I still like to under promise and over deliver.
Sure, of course.
Um, yeah.
So you got the product looking decent. Lisa's out there selling them sight unseen. She's a rock star. At what point do you feel like it's a business? Do you feel like, okay, I think I'm gonna be okay?
After I sold those.
You probably still haven't convinced yourself that.
Oh no,
I haven't. I've been doing this for a long time. I'm still waiting for that to happen.
Well, as a good like entrepreneurial, entrepreneur, like you're never done, right? Like, and
Right.
we'll always be our worst critics. So like, yeah, I can definitely look at what I'm doing today and being like, I could do better, and
Mm-hmm.
um, So I think I'll always be like that. And I got to be self-aware of that. Otherwise, I'll just be a wreck, you know?
Do you prefer, and this is maybe a me ego question, do you prefer, like, I'm sure you're stoked when Lisa sells any, and for any reason, right? Are you more stoked when a person's like, when they have the aha moment about the innovation and how dope like how cool, like how awesome and futuristic this thing is, or is it when they pull out the joint and they're like, ah, and
It's,
you're like,
yeah.
no, but look how cool it is, dude. Like, yeah, that's the joint's great, but there's a fucking, yeah, it's
Yeah, I still do a lot of the virtual demos because of that moment. Like when I see somebody, like when it clicks in their brain, they're like,
yeah,
"Oh my gosh, I can't believe you did it." You know,
so
like
validating, right?
yeah, they're like, "I can't believe you made like a machine that rolls a joint like how I do." That's yeah, very validating. Yeah, the when you sell a machine, that's like, that's more like an obligation. You're like, all right, crap, we gotta, like, I gotta
We
get
got to
this
get
thing
these
out the
units
door.
out the door.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But it's like when somebody lights up and they're like, holy cow, I can't believe you did this. Like that's the most validating moment, to any inventor.
of
And so,
course.
yeah,
Cool.
yeah.
I might have to get one for the office.
Dude, I'd love one right there behind you. That'd be
Yeah, we'll
great.
put it right there. Exactly. So, cannabis years are like dog years. So I'm not going to ask you where what you hope to do even in 2024, but I'm curious, like, talk to me about Q1. What are you most excited for this year? And also, like, how are you going to innovate more?
Yeah. So one of the things that I learned back when I was working at Meta and HP was I was always good at making things modular, and they were too. But if you make something like modular, which means, you got different sub-assemblies. So your feed system is its own thing, and
Yep.
your weigh system and your paper feed and the rolling mechanism. If you make it modular, you can innovate within the machine, right? So
Huh.
so like, I'm working on, I want to be able to run blunt papers. And so I'm like redesigning my paper feed mechanism. And so, and the other cool thing is now my customers, when I have a new innovation or a new problem I solve, I send them a new paper system, and I get to sell them, a new product, and they're stoked because they don't have this old piece of machinery and, oh, we got to buy the blunt machine. It's like, no,
Yeah.
no, you can innovate, or you can update your machine. And
That's
so,
awesome.
yeah,
So
we
is
got
that
some.
is that part of what you're trying to do, is like blunts and maybe like smaller joints, yeah, that's cool.
Yeah,
I,
we're trying to, yeah, just I think that the big thing right now is everybody wants to have customization, right? They want to do everything under the sun and develop all these different SKUs. And right now, this machine is capable of doing a ton, but there's more, like, well, there's always more.
totally. How big's your team right now?
We have 26 employees.
Damn, boy.
Yeah, yeah. I grew up fast, man.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
Yeah,
It's
thank
good.
you.
It's awesome watching these teams grow, like putting out, like I said, just innovating, especially in an industry like you alluded to earlier. Like, it's not every day that we get to see an emerging industry happen, and there's plenty of problems to solve in that
Totally.
emerging industry. And it's a fun one to be in. Kyle, it's always awesome chatting with innovators, especially once figuring out new great ways to get me more stoned than I already am. Can you please tell our guests where they can learn more about you and RollPros?
Yeah, you can visit us on our website, rollpros.com. I'm on LinkedIn, so Kyle Loucks, that's Loucks. Again, yeah, feel free to hit me up. I'm telling you, I love a brainstorm. Like, and the one thing I know is an idea isn't worth much. So like, it's all about, if you find somebody that has passion behind it, and I can help unlock some of those pathway blockers, then I'll help anybody. Like I'm a big proponent for giving people a little bump and then watching them flourish. So
I love that. And it's an important responsibility that entrepreneurs should have. They should exercise that skill of empowering other entrepreneurs to do cool shit.
That's right.
You've been Kyle from RollPros, and I appreciate you. I've been Will from Cannaplanners. This has been Common SENSimilla. My dog is yelling at me, which means she needs to go poop. So we're going to call this podcast complete, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you, everybody. Peace out.